lesson is going to kind of give us an understanding of who the leaders were for both sides. All right, so for the Union and the Confederacy, and just have us start to do some of the things there. All right, so if you take a look at the document, okay, just have it open. You're not doing any notes today. You're not doing any of that. You're just working with the document. We will obviously do this together. Okay, and if you see, we have some questions we're going to answer through the Oversimplified video, 9 questions. Then you guys are going to fill this out. Okay, this will probably get done by the end of the period as well. And then you have some Regents class questions that we're going to do. Okay, so you have some 4 analysis questions that you could look up on Google, or you may know just from the textbook or from whatever. So we'll go through this piece by piece. So I'm going to set up the Oversimplified video. We're not going to watch the whole thing. We're just going to watch the first 12 or 13 minutes. All right, and this gives us a good review of some of the things from the period that we've been talking about. Now, yesterday, I know we saw a review video. That review video was very good, I thought. But it doesn't talk about some of the things like the compromises of 1850. It doesn't talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It leaves out some important details. So I want to make sure we go over this as well. And plus, I just think it's very funny at times. You notice with these Oversimplified videos that they are taking very serious situations, and then they sometimes make it a little funny. It's okay to laugh. At the same time, they are also taking a very complicated situation like the Civil War and bringing it into a nice 15, 20-minute video for us to better understand. So we're going to watch one half of the Oversimplified Part 1. All right, so let's get into that. Get it set up.
Black Friday deals from Optima. Get 300 meg internet now for only $35 a month.
That's 1.5 times the speed of Fios.
This video was made
Okay, so it's going to start with Lincoln's birth, which is kind of stupid, and then it goes into Lincoln rising up as a lawyer and into politics, and then it goes into some of the topics we've been talking about, specifically the Missouri Compromise. All right, so take a look at question 1. All right, question 1 is asking what were the major states' rights issue that was causing all of this conflict. So take a look at questions 1 and 2, and then we're going to answer them as the video goes.
Possible by NordVPN. Click the link down below to get 70% off an annual subscription, plus an additional month free. Also, stun your friends, turn heads, get compliments. Buy yourself some Oversimplified merch today, along with a very honest new character pin. Link in the description down below. Okay, Mrs. Lincoln, this is it. One last push, and we're done. 9 months and 4 days ago, my father brought forth upon my mother himself and gave to her a child, conceived in a shack in Kentucky and dedicated to the proposition that I will drink num-nums from a bottle and do little poo-poos in my pantses for the next 2 to 3 years. Now what is it babies do again? Oh yeah. I am not touching that. Abraham Lincoln grew up with his relatively poor family in Kentucky, eventually moving to Indiana, and finally, Illinois. He read a lot of books, worked a lot of jobs, wrote some questionable poetry, and finally entered the law profession. Despite being self-taught, he turned out to be a pretty clever and astute lawyer. In one case, a guy claimed he witnessed a murder at night, and Lincoln was like, "How could you have seen anything in the dark? There was a bright full moon." A what? A bright full moon. Can you say that again, please? There was a bright full moon. A dim half moon? No, a bright full moon. That's funny, because according to this almanac, there was a dim half moon that night, which makes you a liar. Well, I got a bright full moon for y'all right here. Now that's what I call a rebuttal. Lincoln and his cheekbones weren't only interested in law, however. He also dabbled in the world of politics, serving as a legislator in both local and national assemblies. And what a time it was. Not even 100 years after the Founding Fathers wrote, "All men are created equal," politicians were already asking, yeah, but what does that mean exactly? It means all men. Yeah, but what does that mean exactly? And not just that. States' rights versus the federal government. What are the executive powers of the president? Is cereal a soup? The Founding Fathers left some of these questions perhaps a little too open to interpretation. And the biggest question of them all was slavery. an ugly mark on what should have been a revolutionary new nation based on liberty and democracy. Thomas Jefferson had written a condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence, but out of fear of losing Southern states' support, it was removed. Hey guys, do you think leaving this a little vague will create any unforeseen problems in the future? Cannonball! And those unforeseen problems were now beginning to rear their ugly heads. As the nation developed, the North and the South developed along two very different lines, and two very different cultural identities emerged. Northern cities began rapidly industrializing, while the Southern climate allowed for large plantations of labor-intensive crops. As a result, one half of the country didn't rely on slaves, while the other half had become economically dependent on them. In 1793, Eli Whitney's cotton gin caused the slave trade in the South to explode, while in the North, a growing abolitionist movement was taking root. A general mistrust began to develop between the North and the South.
Okay, so let's go over number 1 and 2. Number 1, obviously, not much of a trick question, is slavery. Now, please keep in mind, obviously, when the Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, when they started our country, they left the slavery question open to interpretation. Remember, that was to make sure that the Southern states signed the Declaration of Independence, because basically, the Founding Fathers understood, if you tried to take away slavery and wrote it in the Declaration of Independence and wrote it in the Constitution, the Southern states would never accept the Constitution. And in essence, we would have two separate countries from the start. So slavery was the main issue. They left it up to the states, and obviously started to lead to this problem. What invention caused a rise of slavery in the 1793? That would be the cotton gin. Okay, and these are two questions I think we should have known already, but this is why it's review. Now let's get into number 3 and number 4. We're going to get into both compromises, the Missouri Compromise first, and the Compromise of 1850 second.
As Northerners felt the South were hell-bent on expanding slavery, and fear spread throughout the South that the North wanted to take their slaves away. In 1819, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states. A perfect balance. A happy medium. A harmonious relationship. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm Missouri, and I would like to become the 23rd state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a free state. Oh no, you don't? You're trying to get one over on us. Missouri's gonna be a slave state. Okay, listen, why don't we just ask Missouri what it wants to be, and we slave state. Well, then, allow me to introduce to you the newest, freshest state on the scene. Maine. Hey, you can't do that, and you can't have any more slave states above this line. What? The issue of slavery is solved, and it will never come up again. A few years later, it came up again. You see, as America expanded westward, each new state or territory that was added threatened to upend the delicate balance between the slave and free states. If one faction managed to outnumber the other, it could gain an easy majority and force its own ideals on the opposing side, leaving a huge portion of the population feeling spiteful and oppressed. For a while, compromises kicked the can down the road and kept the volatile balance in check, as new free and slave states were roughly added in pairs. But then one loudmouth state just had to barge in and ruin everything as usual. The addition of Texas saw the United States enter into a war with Mexico, which they won, gaining a huge amount of land out west and creating even more problems. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm California, and I would like to become the 31st state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a southern slave state. Oh no, you don't. You're trying to get one over on us. California's gonna be a free state. Okay, listen, why don't we just ask California what it wants to be, and we can free state. Well, then, allow me to introduce to you the territories of New Mexico and Utah, able to freely vote for slavery themselves. Hey, you can't do that! And we can enter Northern Territory anytime we want to recapture escaped slaves. What? The issue of slavery is solved, and it will never come up again. A few years later, it came up again.
I love that little way that works there. All right, so number 3 in the Missouri Compromise. With the free states getting in response to Missouri becoming a slave state, Maine gets to become a free state. It gets carved out of Massachusetts, so it keeps the balance of power equal in government. All right. Number 4. What did the slave states get in response to California becoming a free state after the Compromise of 1850? Okay, they got the dreaded fugitive slave law to come into effect. Okay. All right, let's get into number 5 and 6. Now we're going to get into the effects of the Compromise of 1850. We'll get into Bleeding Kansas a little bit. We'll get into some of the violence that starts to take place for the first time after the Compromise of 1850.
In 1854, a Democratic senator from Illinois wanted to build a really cool choo-choo train here and proposed that the territories of Kansas and Nebraska be created open to slavery, even though they were clearly above the Missouri Compromise line. Obviously, the northern states were like, hell no. But the southern Democrats who controlled Congress at the time were like, well, if you love liberty and democracy so much, then you should let them vote on whether slavery should be legal or not. And so it was. Huge numbers of pro- and anti-slavery settlers rushed to Kansas to sway the vote in their favor. And while they were all there, they began to beat the crap out of each other. One of those settlers was a man named John Brown, a former businessman who failed at just about everything he tried and went arguably insane. He was a radical abolitionist and dedicated much of his life to the Underground Railroad and freeing slaves. One night, in revenge for an earlier raid by pro-slavery forces, he and his sons killed a number of pro-slavery settlers in the territory, helping to kickstart years of violence known as Bleeding Kansas. Kansas and Nebraska both eventually voted in favor of outlawing slavery. But from here, the tension began to grow at a rapid pace. In 1852, author Harriet Beecher Stowe penned Uncle Tom's Cabin, a best-selling novel that exposed the terrible cruelty of slavery to the world. Oh, how awful. How morally corrupt a nation must be to allow such things to happen. Your Majesty, what should we do about all the starving children working in the coal mines? Nothing! In 1854, the Republican Party was formed, and Abraham Lincoln emerged as a leading figure. Southern Democrats viewed the new Republican Party with mistrust, believing it to be radical and abolitionist. In 1856, a politician named Charles Sumner gave a speech in Congress, calling out slave-owning Democrats with fiery language. If slavery was a woman, she'd be an ugly one. And the senator from South Carolina would like to boink her. Representative Brooks, do you have a rebuttal? Oh, I have a rebuttal, all right. Yeah, here's a rebuttal for you. Oh, come on. Surely this isn't allowed. I don't know. I'll have to consult the rulebook. I can't find anything about caning a political opponent, but it says here I'm not allowed to wear a woman's underwear. Uh-oh. News of the violence on the Senate floor took the nation by storm. Southern slave owners sent Representative Brooks new canes to replace his now broken one. And on the floors of Congress, politicians carried weapons in self-defense, which is never a good sign.
Okay, so number 5, what did Kansas and Nebraska? So remember, after the Compromise of 1850, that sets up the territories get to use popular sovereignty or hold elections to see if they want to become free or slave. And despite there was a lot of violence, they did eventually say they were going to outlaw or ban slavery. Okay, so Kansas and Nebraska ended up becoming free territories. Number 6. What did Charles Sumner do? This is pretty wild. In our Congress, we had 2 representatives that actually, one of them said something a little bit mean, and he took his cane and started beating the crap out of him. That's a true story. So this goes to show you this topic was a topic that definitely was leading to a lot of violence and something people were very passionate about. So he beat him up with a cane over the slavery issue. Okay, so you're starting to see violence start to happen. All right, and once this violence starts to happen, this is just going to get us even closer to the Civil War. Number 7, take a look at number 7, and then we'll stop and go over number 8 and 9 in a little bit.
In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott case that all people of African descent, slave or free, could not be citizens, and therefore could not sue for their own freedom under any circumstances, undoing years of progress with the strike of a gavel. Now, within all of this bitter debate over slavery, there were many nuances. North versus South, Republican versus Democrat, states versus the federal government. But let's strip all of that away. For 4 million individuals living in America, this wasn't about political intrigue or party alignment. It was about the basic human right to be free. Men, women, and children were stolen from their homelands and brought to the American continent, where for generations they were considered to be property, forced to live in poverty, and work from sunrise to sunset. Plantation overseers did whatever they felt was necessary to get the most out of their slaves. Punishments were often barbaric. Families were regularly separated, and parents could often only watch, as their children were auctioned off, never to be seen again. thousands of slaves took the treacherous risk of running away, and abolitionists in the North helped many escape via the Underground Railroad as bounty hunters entered the North to chase them down. Leading figures within the abolitionist movement included many significant free black men and women. But it's important to note that for many of the anti-slavery white individuals in the North, opposition to slavery was often an economic issue, not a moral one, as many worried large plantations would take their lands and livelihoods away. Abraham Lincoln knew that slavery was a moral evil, and he regularly spoke out against it in powerful speeches that helped him rise through the ranks of the new Republican Party. He lamented at the hypocrisy of a great American nation meant to stand as a shining beacon of freedom while also enslaving 4 million men, women, and children. He most famously declared in 1858 that a house divided against itself cannot stand, that one day slavery in America would end. However, even Lincoln was cautious in his opposition. He didn't want to outlaw it entirely, but simply prevent its expansion so that given enough time, he believed it would naturally die out. Thankfully, history would force his hand. In October 1850,
Okay, yeah, so Lincoln gives his House Divided speech, which again kind of brings out the point that Lincoln says the country can't be half slave and half free. The country needs to make a decision and either outlaw and get rid of slavery. Now, when he actually runs for president, he doesn't take that position. He takes the position of stopping the spread of slavery. So I think deep down he did want to stop slavery, but he couldn't come out and say that originally from the start. And there's some reasons why, which we'll talk about soon. All right, so take a look at number 7 there. All right, and then we're going to look at number 8 and then number 9 as well. What was the South worried about when Lincoln was elected president? I think we've alluded to this already in the previous video.
1959, one abolitionist decided he'd try to single-handedly take down slavery by force. Who would be crazy enough to even attempt such a thing? It's our good friend, John Brown. He planned to seize arms from an armory in the town of Harper's Ferry, free the slaves there, and continue south, inciting a major slave uprising along the way. A noble cause, a bad plan, and terrible execution. Brown's men took the armory and some hostages, but were quickly surrounded by one Robert E. Lee and his U.S. Marines. Brown was captured, and a couple of months later, he was executed for treason. Northerners sympathized with Brown, but Southerners were like, you see this? They're coming for us. Soon, there'll be 1 million John Browns. 1 million John Browns? What on earth are you thinking about? A John Brown farm? Yeah, me too. To make matters worse, new northern free states meant now the southern states really were outnumbered, and they were beginning to feel bitterly spiteful and oppressed. Further fear began to spread in the South when news broke that a relatively unknown figure had just secured the Republican Party nomination for president. Abraham Lincoln, mostly well-liked among anti-slavery Northerners, had made some of the most powerfully worded speeches against slavery of any politician at the time. And now, there was a chance that he and his cheekbones could become president. For the South, that would be too much. In the 1860 election, Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 southern states. But much to their horror, when the final results came in, Lincoln had won by an electoral college landslide. Lincoln himself tried to calm their fear. How many times do I have to tell you, I'm not gonna take away your slaves? Yeah, right, Honest Abe. We've had enough of you Northerners. We're gonna go form our own country. You can't do that. Why not? Well, if you had won the election, would it be okay for us to leave? Of course not. Well, why not? Because that's not how victim mentality works. Many states felt that when they joined the Union, they always withheld the right to leave it whenever they pleased. Many people living in 19th century America often felt more loyalty to their state than to the nation. And
Okay, so number 8, what was the South worried about? They were worried that Lincoln was going to take away their slaves. Which he wasn't directly saying, but I think the inference was not exactly wrong, so you can't exactly blame them. So you see the South has a little bit more loyalty to their actual states. This is sectionalism, right? I see them, this is the state of Texas, and they're having a seesaw with them. They cared more about being a Texian or being a Alabama citizen as opposed to a United States citizen. And you're going to see that come into play here. Watch this video finish out and then take a look at number 9.
now, with the South feeling like it had lost its voice in the federal government, they were out of here. South Carolina was the first to go, and over a period of 6 months, one by one, 11 slave states officially seceded from the Union. with just 4 contested border states opting to remain. The seceding states issued a number of official documents justifying their secession. South Carolina proclaimed that it was northern states' hostility to slavery that rendered the federal government illegitimate. Mississippi declared that their position was thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. And in a speech, the Confederate vice president stated that the new Confederate government rested upon what he called the great truth of racial inequality. Revered American generals, such as Robert E. Lee, opted to side with their states over the Union. And with all the chaos, one New York lawyer wrote that rather than a bald eagle, America's national bird should be a debilitated chicken. And hey, I kind of like that. One man, watching the crisis unfold, knew it would be his job to solve it. Lincoln was just about to hop on a train and become the President of the United States of America. Hey man, you're hella ugly. Grow a beard or something to hide that face. Good idea. Still ugly. With assassination plots already underway, Lincoln had to travel to Washington, D.C. under heavy disguise and protection. All along the way, he received stacks of threatening letters. May the hand of the devil strike you down. You are destroying this country. Damn you, every breath you take. Love from Grandma? At his inauguration speech, Lincoln once again reiterated that no, I do not want to take away anyone's slaves. But for Lincoln, he did want to preserve the Union. He declared secession to be nothing but an illegitimate rebellion. In your hands and not in mine, he said, is the momentous issue of civil war. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. We are not enemies, but friends. It was clear Lincoln was ready and willing to get freaky.
Okay, so we'll end right there with number 9. What was Lincoln's main goal? Okay, again, it was not to end slavery. It was to preserve the Union, which was bring the country back together. All right, because when he steps into office, he gets inaugurated, already have about 7 or 8 states left. Okay, this is the time when he's presidential elect. He doesn't come into the inauguration until March, and already a lot of states is left. So his main goal is to bring the country back together. All right, so here's what you're going to do next. This is going to be on your own. You're going to work at your own pace. All right, you're going to fill in the leaders of the Civil War chart. I just want you to become familiar with the names. I want you to become familiar with the sides. So you're actually going to use Google to get some of the answers here. I already kind of did the first one with you, so you want to know the name of the country, right? So what was the name of the country in the North? Because we have 2 separate countries right now. We are no longer the United States of America. We have different presidents. We have different country names. We have the North and the South have 2 different names. We have 2 different flags. We have different generals. We have different military uniforms. All right, so we want to become familiar with each of them. So if I was you, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. You go to google.com, okay, and just how I do here. Okay, what was the name of the North during the Civil War? It even comes up. All right, and the name is the Union. Okay, and then you can do the same thing for the South. Find out the names of the presidents, okay, and do so on and so forth from there. Okay, so you guys have about 16 minutes to work through this. All right, I'll be here if you guys have any questions, obviously. And then if you finish those early, you could then go on to the questions at the bottom, which is just some further research you're using Google just to become more familiar so we can hit the ground running on Monday. All right. Could you guys just write in the chat? Let me know you guys are okay with what you have to do. I think it should be pretty straightforward. Thank you, Madison. Okay, Mohammed. Jacqueline, you good? Okay. You guys are the best. Thank you. I'll be here if you have any questions.